Hello and welcome to Startup Kitchen Talks, where we speak with master chefs to learn the ingredients and the recipes for success. I'm your guest host today, Andrew Gray, GP at Tilia Impact Ventures, and we are joined today by Pawel Michalski. Pawel Michalski is an investor and community building powerhouse. Pawel is the creator of investor communities such as VC Leaders and Coben Angels. When he's not bringing people together, he's moonlighting as a venture partner for the brilliant climate VC World Fund. And when you Google Pawel's name, you will notice that he and his opinions are everywhere. He's done interviews with many of the top European names in VC. He's speaking on topics of deep tech, defense, and especially VC in general. What sticks out for me, Pawel, are your strong opinions and your kind of holistic visibility into so much of the VC landscape in both Europe and also in the US. So today I want to tap into this wisdom. We're going to talk a little bit about the current state of innovation and venture capital, some trends that we're seeing both in Europe, the CEE region, and across the world. And then we're going to grossly speculate on the future. So welcome, Pawel. Thank you for joining us.
Hi there and welcome. Glad to be here.
Yeah, we're recording this in Prague, so you drove in this morning from Poland. Thanks for making the trip in. But before we get into grossly speculating on the future, I want to hear a little bit more about your story. So can you tell us your story? How did you end up in the land of startups and investment?
Happy to do so. I think the gist of my story is that I'm a lawyer by training, a banker by trade, and I hope an entrepreneur by heart. I've landed in venture capital because I think it's the only space where the combination of those three is actually coming together very well. So, combining the negotiation skills of a lawyer, a bit of math from my banking days, and then the understanding of the basic understanding of how you build a business. It's a very nice combination for somebody trying to make their name in the VC world. But the longer version is that while still in the banking industry, I was working as a part of a team that supervised an LP started infrastructure fund of 700 million euros. And I was tasked with negotiating or helping put together Fund 2. So I got to learn the intricacies of the LP business first, before I was asked with my then boss and friends to start a fund for a group of wealthy individuals. So we embarked on this journey not knowing too much about venture, but knowing pretty well how the PE industry at large operates. And we thought that we could learn it on the go. But we quickly discovered that it couldn't be further from the truth. Actually, not because of the industry itself. It's not that complicated, but to someone who's made their money on more traditional businesses, some things are pretty hard to grasp, and that's on the backbone of this exercise of raising a fairly small VC fund from wealthy individuals in Poland. I decided with two other friends to start an education program called VC Leaders. So first, it was basically our poke at the industry in Poland. Then, in 2017, when it all started, to improve, the wider understanding of what VC is all about. It started basically as an education initiative, and then we started to grow it with my friend Damien, who's a Pole, born in Poland but raised in Germany. So we basically tried to bridge the gap between what this industry is like in Western Europe with what we saw in Eastern Europe. So basically, first it was an educational program, and then it quickly expanded into the community territory. In the middle of all of it, I joined Common Angels as a managing partner, and then you know I think simultaneously I was building two adjacent but also very different communities of business angels in Poland, and then venture capital in Central Eastern Europe, but also bridging the gap between the West and the East. So that's how it all came to be. So I've been in this industry for the last 7 years. Yeah, I think I still have a way to go.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I noticed that community and education seem to be kind of common threads through a lot of the work that you've been doing. And I think this is important because it was a nascent industry 10 years ago. And most of the GPs were not entering from nowadays what we see as being like founder operator backgrounds, but rather they were coming in from banking, from private equity, because it was this kind of new asset class and predominantly viewed as a financial one. So I think that was heavily needed through the last 10 years to reskill people into this new industry. So why community? Why education? How has that been a common thread for you?
I think so. There's a couple of recurring themes for me and my career that weave into all this. Um, I think firstly, when it comes to community, I think when you think about why people listen to a podcast like this, why people go to events, why people meet at all, is because we're social animals. So, in the end of the day, you can automate everything, in our professional lives, but human to human connections. So, I think I just wanted to create something that would surpass myself as a person, and would if I'm not around anymore, it would still be in people's minds. And I think quite early in my career, I understood that people, when they look back at their careers, of course they look at their biggest achievements and the defining moments of their careers, but they when they reflect on something and think about something positively, it's more often than not a community vibe.
Mm,
Um, People didn't used to call it a community. I think it was framed as such in recent years, but it's basically about how and when people come together. So it's one. Then second, education, I think, is the biggest lever that you can pull in your career. Whatever your background. Um, I I strongly believe that education is not only the formal process that you have to go through because somebody tells you to. It's something that should actually be part of your routine, especially in VC. With things changing, all the time, you have to be on alert, and being on alert means learning almost every day.
mm.
Like there's something new. There is something new being built literally, the moment we speak. So to stay up to date, you have to uh, be learning. And I think people forget about that. Like people kind of think that once they have a skill, um, it's enough to keep on pushing and building. And people, I think, buy into this narrative of you know it's either or. It's like you either build something and you do like crazy shit, or you learn. And the learning part is, I think, sometimes shamed for being a passive thing. Like you learn, which means you're not doing
Mm,
something which is bad.
mm,
I'm actually of the opposite view. Like I think uh, learning is the part of doing something, reflecting on that, putting some structure around it, and then being able to create something better. So even in the startup land, learning could mean you set out to build something. If it's successful, then you document it, like what you think worked and what didn't. If you failed, you do the same thing, and then you combine it. You don't average it out necessarily, but you kind of think about what are the best practices based off these two ends of the spectrum. And I think it's the same for VCs. VCs, I mean, venture capital is not very well documented. Um, Without naming anybody, I've when we started out in 2017, I set out to read all there is about venture capital. It wasn't much, to be honest, but even the books that were written by guys who were considered to be the best ones out there, they relied on hearsay. And I have a very specific, a very well known professor from a very well known institution who wrote a book about this industry, and then named specific numbers, like as statistics, like how it goes, like this and that many startups fail, right? And I was looking for the footnote, like where did he get this number from? And it wasn't there. And I was like, I took the time to basically find out why and where this number comes from. But it was basically, so he named it, and then a ton of other publications named this number as a reference, with nobody checking, what where the number came from, which makes you wonder, like, okay, if this is the standard of this industry, like we're very early in this, in the journey of building this sector. So that's why I think education really matters, because it's not only about teaching people necessarily. Like, even when we started, I wasn't the one to teach people like how to do this. We were inviting people who were more knowledgeable than us, and most of anybody who we knew in this industry those 7 years ago. And at the same time, like, you try to document the things that work and why they work, and the ones that don't. You collect the data, you try to clean the data, and then decide, okay, this is what works, and this is why we think it does. I think this is why education is really important, even for VCs who tend to, appear as if they knew everything. And one small comment, that I wanted to make when you said, back in those days we needed a lot of education because the people were transitioning from like less obvious roles, like more finance than former operators. I think there's one huge misconception about what the best type of a VC is. So even those 7 years ago, people were complaining like we don't have operator VCs, like people who transferred from an operator role into a VC. And I remember checking this hypothesis against the most successful VCs of the then recent past. And nobody on the Forbes Midas list in the in the last few years, like in 2017, and looking backwards, almost nobody from the most successful investors had a background in operating. So you had a journalist, you had a former lawyer, you had a guy who who was a career VC, which means to me that there's no cookie cutter answer to what makes a great VC. But I think a lot of those people were basically quite successful because of other things, and we also wanted to discover. So if not for the background, like what are the the things that make them great? So that's more of a personal journey to me. Like, education is also about discovering for yourself, like what are the things that make a great venture capitalist.
I love that. There's a lot to unpack. Touching on a couple of points there. I mean, that's a contrarian opinion now, to say that you don't need to be a great founder operator to be a good VC. And I'm kind of in two minds of that one. It actually comes up a lot in conversation. The cool thing to say now is that we only want founders and operators to be VCs. And that's important because they've walked the journey. They're able to empathize with the founders. And I've been down that path. And I know that on a weekly basis, you're making life or death decisions, and you feel like there's no one that has your back. So it is important to have someone who's kind of walked that before. But on the other hand, I mean, if you look at the skills that you need to be a great VC, yes, founder-operator experience and scaling experience is extremely important. that can come from either being a founder or having joined a startup that's scaled like hell, and you go through that whole journey. But there are other factors. You need community around you so that you can be helpful, so that you can see things. You also need domain expertise in the fields that you're investing in, so that you're actually able to recognize the potential in an opportunity when you see it. And then, I mean, finally, you need to have some investment experience. And that, funnily enough, that's the last thing I think that now VCs are hiring for. They're rather hiring, great operators, great founders, and and this is now my contrary opinion. I think you're starting to see some of the accidental negative side effects of lack of portfolio modeling, lack of caring about ownership stakes, and some of these things which were traditionally the strengths of the VCs that have done very well maybe 10 years ago. So I know now that there's a batch of fantastic founder operators that are now running VCs. And so I think when you look at this Midas list 10 years from now, it will be the opposite. It'll be full of fantastic founders and operators. But I also see a risk that new VC funds that are following this mantra of only having founder operators might miss some of the fundamental skill sets that VCs need. So, yeah, very, very, very interesting point.
I think even if you look nowadays, I mean, at the Forbes Midas list Europe, like the top dog on the list is Paweł Chudzinski,
Mhm. 0.9.
0.9. Paweł only had a few years of investment banking experience, not to discard it, but before starting his own outlet. I mean, he did invest, did a great job from early on, totally deserving the top spot. But it's not like your, you know, founder operator archetype
Mm.
that is, on the top of the list. And there's a couple more who also don't have this, very advertised background. But I'm gonna say this. I honestly don't think that there is a simple answer to this question because it's a very complex topic. This a composition of your venture fund. It I think depends on a few things. Fund size matters. Um, there's some things that you wouldn't be able to do as a GP, running a VC firm if you don't have the money or the resources to do it. Like, I don't believe that you can build a whole platform around your fund, like a platform VC type of a play. If you run a 20 million fund, because at the end of the day, you're gonna, you're probably gonna run out of the money to hire the right people to stick to this. There needs to be a certain incentive for people to stick around. On the opposite side of the spectrum, you have Andreessen Horowitz, which right now, it's hard to call them a VC. Like the funds that they run, it's hard to call them like VC funds anymore. It's like a huge firm around deploying capital. And when you look for A16Z partner, you end up seeing dozens, if not hundreds of names on the list because there's so many of them. So it might matter less in the entire Andreessen Horowitz partner spectrum what your background is because your colleagues could fill in the gaps.
Mm.
So I think it matters more for a firm of this size to be able to put together a team that complements each other.
Yes.
Whereas if you run a very dedicated outlet in Prague, focusing on founders in not even Central Eastern Europe, but Czech Republic, it might matter more as to who those founders would like to talk to and have their backs as their first backer. So to summarize, I think it really matters. Your strategy also dictates what kind of a person you should be to run this, rather than as a general answer, like the best VCs out there are former operators. I don't think it's the case.
Mm.
It very much depends on what you want to build. As a VC firm.
Yeah, it's also quite dynamic. And I guess I wanted to ask you, so you've for almost a decade now, you've been working with VC leaders from all over, not just CEE, but also Europe. How have you seen approaches and maturity and how have you seen that evolve over time?
Well, there's like a horizontal and a vertical view that I have on this. So horizontally, I would say when you look at the map, um, there's obviously a great divide between the emerging and the developed ecosystems. So there's still a great divide between let's say a Polish, Czech, Estonian ecosystem and a German, a British, or a French one. The money is the money available for founders in those bigger countries is still much larger. And I think also those ecosystems are a bit more mature in terms of how many cycles they've gone through. So there's much more people who can share their experience, and basically just looking at the scale of it, there's the the pool of people that you can tap to do this is just much bigger. Whereas the emerging ecosystems of Europe are still very much depending on just a few people, building those hopefully someday great firms um, to help you. And I'm just speaking from the VC ecosystem perspective. Um, it has, it reverberates across the entire startup spectrum, because if there's fewer knowledgeable and experienced VCs, then the founders also can, tap into a smaller pool. Luckily, we see that this great divide is, basically becoming smaller by the day, because I think VCs from all over Europe and even from the States right now are looking into those smaller ecosystems and countries much more. So the pool of available experienced people who've seen it all, it's growing larger. Now vertically, I would say we see um, things that um, we haven't seen in the past, which is to say that over the years I've seen this industry try to reinvent the wheel in a sense. So I remember ICOs used to be a thing. Like there was a bunch of VCs who said, like, yeah, we're only focusing on new coins being minted, like crypto focused funds,
Mm,
but only looking for companies who do their ICOs.
mm,
For those of you who don't remember those things, it's the initial coin offering. So where new coins were minted, um, and then all of a sudden there was none of them. And then we had the big SPAC craze, like special purpose acquisition vehicles were a thing, and even few of the most known VC funds in Europe did them. I think most of them crashed and burned.
mm.
But it was just I think just another gimmick that was super popular at the time. Some of it didn't even touch the emerging ecosystems of Central Eastern Europe, which I'm actually quite happy for. So we didn't see as much of it, but there it happened in the States first, and then it basically went viral
Mm.
in some larger countries.
It was a bit of a moment of hysteria, right? Everybody rushing to try to access public liquidity. And now I think
yeah,
we're doing the opposite, which is stay private for as long as possible. We don't want market valuations of the public.
yeah, that's true. But just again looking at this, the trends. there was a bit of that, like, trying to get as much liquidity as possible for the LPs, and was around, when COVID hit. So everybody was worried that, the world is coming to an end, and so we need liquidity in order to, keep on going, and to stash some money in our socks.
R.I.P. Good times.
Yeah, RIP good times. And then, the world didn't end, but went into a new crisis mode. But just not to stick to the, the popular things. I think there's a lot of things happening in the so-called background. So things that are popping here and there, new things, new developments, like VCs trying to invent a way to be different. So I think the last craze is a solo GP thing. I'm saying it's a craze because I'm not discarding it for the fact that there are some great people who are better off if they raise their own fund and keep on doing a solo work with just the technical stuff around them. But my opinion is it's a very risky way to do venture, because coming back to what I said about the great fund composition, as in what kind of skills you should have as a GP. I think there's a problem around the fact that as a solo GP you rely mostly on what you can do as a person, and let's say you're sick, you're tired, you have a crisis in your marriage, whatever happens to you as a person, affects the fund enormously. And I'm not saying that of course there are legal ways to avoid or mitigate the risks, but as a human being, I'll be quite worried about what happens, within 10 years of funding somebody who goes solo.
Interesting. Can I make a couple of points in
Sure.
defense of solo GPs,
Sure.
especially in our region? So, I mean, I actually came to conclude that it's an elegant model in the CEE region specifically for two reasons. One is that you tend to have a smaller fund size, and the exits here are a lot smaller. And when you have that smaller fund size, then your ability to make great returns on quite reasonable exits, you're not wishing for the absolute rocket ships. You're actually able to make quite attainable exits and still give very good returns to your investor. I think that's point number one. And point number two is the more I reflect on the role of the CEE VC ecosystem. So the problem with CEE is the founders are scattered everywhere. And often they're not even aware of a lot of the VC funds that are around. So discovery is insanely difficult here compared to other regions. Different languages, cultures, ecosystems, pockets of brilliance, and quite hard to find. So I see the role of most early stage CEE funds actually to be discovery. So we are about dragging great founders and putting them on a global platform so that the bigger funds, the US funds or the kind of pan-European funds, are able to pick them up and run with their kind of global expansion. And that's why I think you don't see as many like later stage CEE-focused funds. We are all kind of trampolines, discovery engines. And I think who better to kind of do that than these very socially connected, community-based solo GPs, especially when they run these models of having many, many LPs with small tickets. And so it's almost like a community where people have a slight vested interest. And that community just kind of generates deal flow. And, I know from our fundraising that it's relatively difficult to take a lot of small LPs if you're trying to get a fund that's larger than 10, 15 and up above millions. So it really supports the solo GP model to do this kind of community base. So I do think, I understand what you're saying, but I do think there is a nice, elegant argument in defense of that in our region.
Don't get me wrong. When it works, it works. But when it doesn't, and I remember from the already referred to banking days, I remember when we were structuring fund number 2, the biggest point, negotiated by the GPs was inheritance, because the GPs were, wouldn't call them quite old. I hope they're not listening. But I remember when they specifically, sat at the table, and the most heated debate was around, if I die, what happens to my carry, right? And so these guys were like extremely successful. I'm telling you, like, even in VC standards, they were managing a much harder structure in terms of like the assets that they were investing in. I was super impressed, but the reality of it was they wanted, the money that was in the fund to be, not only, um, you know, not only for it to increase in value, but also in the event that something happens to them, the money to, land in their kids' pockets.
Mm.
And when you think about the solo GP, the problem, m- m- very often is that when they start out, they're really solo. It's not like, because there's one thing that most people don't understand, which is, as a solo GP doesn't mean that you don't hire people. I mean, you can,
Mm.
and I know, quite a few solo GPs like who are the sole beneficiaries of the, of managing, and the whole responsibility of running a VC fund is on them. But they do hire other people they call potters, who work, or salaried. Sometimes they get some carry points.
Hmm.
They can benefit from that, but they're not responsible for all of it. Um, but there's quite a number of new entrants who are either unable or unwilling to, um, hire somebody and call them a potter. Uh, so they're basically solo. And my point is that it's a increased risk. Sometimes I think even an unnecessary one. And I understand that a lot of it comes down to, okay, how much can you raise, and realistically speaking, can you afford to have another person benefit from your success?
Mm.
Because maybe it, doesn't make much sense, or maybe you don't know the kind of a person. But even then, I think, running a solo outlet in this industry, which is very intensive. It's a very intensive, kind of work. People really, I mean, I think people don't really appreciate it as much. Like,
Mhm.
it's a really difficult line of business, and so I wouldn't want to put that, much of a burden on anybody, um, you know, any single person really.
Mm. Mm.
So that's my point.
So yeah, I think I'll have to get a solo GP on next on the pod to talk us through that journey as well. So shout out to all the solo GPs hustling out there. Okay, sticking on trends for a little bit. You talked off the air. You talked about a kind of arms race that you see within VC funds. What are you referring to? Is this a technological thing, a size thing? What's happening there?
Well, I think, we did touch on the liquidity portion of this industry a little bit. So let me start with this. There's not much liquidity going on right now. So we are in the middle of a liquidity crunch. Part of it is, because the public markets are, I think it's fair to say the public markets in Europe are non-existent. Like, okay, there are some, success stories here and there, but it's not like, it's not like founders are singing high praise of, this or that, stock exchange. And those few that made it big, uh, and exited through an IPO, they did it in the States.
Mm.
Uh, and even these guys are really reluctant to list right now. And there's I think, a couple of reasons for that, like, to not dwell too much, uh, around these parts. I think it's mainly because, like, it's a, you know, it's a risk. It's an additional risk that many people don't want to take. It's scrutiny. It's, getting exposed to, potential, liability. So people are actually avoiding it. And I saw it on LinkedIn. I think Matt Turk from First Mark, referring to a company raising their Series J, I think, said like Series J is the new IPO. And I think that the reason for that is, liquidity as a process, uh, of, selling company, recycling some money, it's dying out. A lot of companies are staying private for longer. And like I said, there's a variety of reasons for that, which means that, the money that is available, it's, basically being managed by some other private investors, be it larger VC funds, PE houses, or other types of investors. Um, so this is one problem. So the money is being managed already, so it's less available for people who want to raise a fund. So whenever they want to raise a fund, they have to tap into the sources that I know of or that are close to home. And these guys are also waiting for their liquidity events. They invested, some of them who are knowledgeable, they've already invested in venture, and they're waiting for the big paydays or not, like depending on who they invested into. So this already fuels like an arms race between the existing venture funds or venture firms who want to raise the next fund and the new entrants.
It also massively conflicts a few of those funds, because I want to raise a new fund, and I want to go back to the LPs that I already have from my first fund and get them to come into my second fund, or maybe first into third. And they say, well, until I have the exits from the first fund, I'm not actually able to have any liquidity to give you for the third fund. And so now me as a GP, I'm conflicted because I maybe want to, the pressure is I'll sell early. And we all know that like nothing kills your returns on that first fund better than selling a winner early. But you have this pressure to sell early to give liquidity back to those LPs so that they can give you more money coming into the fund. I don't see enough people talking about this. I don't know if it's our dirty little secret in venture, but this conflict seems to be everywhere around us.
Well, I think there's much more to this than meets the eye. It's a very fine balance of running a VC fund and running a VC firm. Running a VC fund means maximizing the returns for your existing investors. Running a VC firm means surviving. So, as any other entrepreneur, you would mostly worry about your ability to keep on going, and to keep on going, you have to have the money. And you have the money, you have to raise. So like I said, it is a conflict to a degree, but like I said, it's a very fine balance that you have to strike if you want to keep on going as a venture capitalist. On the other hand, I this reminds me of this little saying that comes from J.P. Morgan, the man who said, "I've made my fortune selling too early," which means that sometimes to make it big, you have to recycle, and be able to invest in the new gen of exciting companies. Which is not to say that I'm all in for selling too early and then crying your shoulder on the what could have been. There's also another not a meme, but a funny video of the founder of Nvidia and the founder of Masayoshi-san, the founder of the Vision, SoftBank, and then Vision Fund. So Vision Fund used to be the largest Nvidia investor, like with more than 20% of a stake, but they had to sell.
Oof.
And there's this video of Jensen, the founder of Nvidia, saying it out loud at the conference with Masayoshi-san standing next to him. Well, it's quite recent, by the way. And then saying, Masa, you used to be the largest investor in Nvidia, not anymore. And then the guy, bursting into tears, like, of course, jokingly, but of course, if he did stay on, then he'll be probably one of the wealthiest people in the world right now. Which I think he still is, he's still quite okay, but not.
No, I love that. It's actually one of my personal investment rules of life is leave something in it for the next person. So you don't want to try to ride something until every drop is squeezed out of it. You need to leave something in it for the next person, and it always works out better for you. Okay, changing tacks a little bit. I want to talk about the political environment. There's a lot of tension. There's also a lot of kind of technological change. It feels like a pretty dynamic, uncertain, and almost scary time at the moment. How do you see that this is affecting venture and innovation, startups, technology?
I dare say I'm a political animal, so I say I love it because I think there's not much more than affects life, as much as politics are. So, I think, and just to, as a bit of a side comment, I think that venture capitalists, say people class, are inadvertently affecting politics here and there. Um, I think it's even more visible now than it used to be. So in the States, you have you know people creating charts tracking how much this or that VC have contributed to each presidential campaign,
Oof.
and they're like contributing a lot of their personal wealth to politics. Some of it maybe to influence the political agenda. Some of it maybe because they can, but they are active in politics. Um, um, you know, and you know, again, looking at the current state of events in the states with Trump winning the elections, um, and his second in command being actually a former venture capitalist.
Mm.
Things are looking to take a twisty turn in a sense that you're probably going to see even more venture capitalists enter the political fold and try to shape things uh, to what I
Yeah,
expect to be.
it's getting pretty dark from the outside. Like when I see that TikTok ban coming through January 19th, like if you can't beat them, then get into politics and have them banned. And, so much for freedom and competition. I think that we're entering quite a dark phase of restriction and cronyism.
Yeah, but I think to that, I think whatever the case, actually, I think it's worth remembering that people who people who are business people first and foremost, and who have a running concern somewhere, would definitely be biased, uh, in one way or another. So when you have these, when you have venture capitalists enter politics, it's inadvertently coming down to, okay, what kind of an agenda they want to push. Um, Maybe if they are well off enough, maybe they're doing it for the country. I'm not discarding this part. But this is just to say that I'm quite skeptical whenever it happens directly. But on the other hand, and this is something that I wanted to answer to first and foremost, I think that politics are affecting the business world now more than ever. And I don't mean it by restrictions or cronyism or too much regulation. I just think that we live in a very complex environment right now. Um, Things are moving super fast. Like, you look at AI, I don't know what's gonna hit us next. Like, maybe we're gonna have the quantum outbreak. Like, in a year or two. Who knows? Like, things are moving super quickly, and I think that your everyday Joes, they don't understand what's happening.
Mm.
It's hard for me to understand it, being in the middle of it, and I'm not a technical person per se. Like, I'm not sitting at a university and doing basic research, but from what I understand, it's growing like crazy. And I think it has been precipitating for some time now. So it's hard for me to imagine what's gonna happen next. So when things get out of hand, the I think the easiest reaction for us as human beings is, okay, let's
Pull the
yeah,
handbrake.
yeah, exactly. And the way to do it, for many of us, is, okay, let's fucking, shouldn't have sworn it,
Maybe
but
pause because we otherwise we get an explicit rating on
yeah,
Spotify. So the easiest way to do it.
the easiest way to do it for us as human beings would be to regulate it. And this is what's been happening in the European Union. I'm not saying it's outright good or bad. I think there are some instances where where it's good, some instances where it's industry killing. But look at the states; they are banning TikTok because they don't like the risk of, I don't know, if it's basically a geopolitical risk of being invigilated by China, or it's a commercial risk of their social media companies being threatened by the
Mm.
new entrant. it's hard to know for certain, but I think I wouldn't buy into the simple truths out there, like the Chinese are basically tracking us down with this technology, or no, it's just the social media companies trying to ban a competitor. I think it's way more complex, and
Mm,
the reason I say it's complex is, look, we have a war going on
mm,
right outside of our borders in Poland, and it's hard not to see the influence that these kind of things can take. Look at Romania. The reason why the reason they say they had to cancel the presidential elections and redo them is because of a TikTok campaign that was founded or funded by Russian organizations.
mm.
Um, and you have things like that going on in Europe. The same thing happened in Moldova, not quite recently, not so long ago. So I think that the political tensions are affecting even those things that we take for granted. Now, many industries, it means that all of a sudden we find ourselves in the need of certain technology. It could be a cybersecurity company that we are looking for, and I think cybersecurity companies are in for a good year
Oh, yeah.
next year.
Oh, yeah.
I think there is even on the political front. And I've heard some things that I can't disclose, but I think even the highest level politicians are now looking at venture as a way to basically fuel the next gen of cybersec companies.
Yeah. They're still figuring out how to get into it, a la NATO Innovation Fund, but
Yeah,
speed bumps.
yeah, absolutely. But it's like the sheer amount of money that will flow into this sector is overwhelming. Like all of a sudden you'll find yourself in a completely new territory with overabundant, pools of capital, whereas you had not that much, I'd say, not so long ago.
Hmm.
So I think politics will definitely influence this sector very much.
That's interesting. Um, let's keep talking about the future a little bit, because I think the listeners really love to hear speculations, and I know that VCs love to speculate. So there's a good match there. So you talked about technology, AI. This is accelerating. These tools are coming out every year. The option of pulling the handbrake, I don't think really exists globally at the moment. So where do you see this going? And how do you see it shaping both kind of the European more conservative landscape and then the global venture and innovation sphere?
Well, to be fair, I'm freaking out a little bit um, about all this happening because on the one hand side, I still see people do accounting on paper. I personally know of companies who, maybe smaller city, more traditional background, people in their late 60s, 70s, they still do. There are still people, and I'm telling you from experience, not from hearsay, there are still people doing accounting on paper, by hand every day nowadays. At the same time, you know, on my phone alone, I have an app that, can basically take any picture, turn it automatically into a spreadsheet, and answer any question that I might have, like any complicated calculation,
Mm.
just from a photo, like, and you have it in your damn pocket.
But not
It's
everybody has it in their pocket.
yeah, I mean, but I think increasingly everybody will, like the adoption of technology, like mobile apps, uh, or smartphones in general. It's only gonna increase. It's not gonna decrease all of a sudden. Like I don't think this will be the case.
Mm.
Um, but I'm not gonna stop here. I think like as a person, I'm following up with the trends in this industry as well. So last week was by many news outlets that follow the AI industry was called the best AI week to ever happen because of the number of new announcements coming up every day by all major competitors.
Yeah, the Christmas, 12 days of Christmas,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. But it's like it was coming from all angles. Like any large company
Mm,
was trying to push something out, and
yeah.
into the general public. So you had, OpenAI introduced their search engine to everybody on the Pro subscription, taking on Google. Um, you had Google come out of the shadow with few announcements like, okay, there's a new model and it's super fast. It checks against facts. It's the most factual.
Oh, it's
Uh,
amazing for research,
it's
the new Gemini project structure.
the deep research. Yeah,
Yeah,
I've been using it
yeah.
extensively. I just showed it to my family, like like basically I nowadays I have these discussions around the dinner table at home. Like, look, Dave did this thing, and this can do this or that, like within minutes. And I just showed my parents how I just do. Okay, it's only in English. They don't speak English as much, so I just basically typed in a certain research phrase. It's went through 150 different websites. It created a whole research report of
Mm,
10 pages referencing all the things that it found in footnotes. And then I said, like, even if you don't speak the language, you can turn on DeepL, which is another research AI driven app or startup, coincidentally founded by a Polish guy. um, and you can translate it
mm.
on the go, like or maybe even stick to Google and just ask Google Translate to do it for you. So just and it all happened within minutes. Of course, it wasn't super thorough as a research, so you would still need some human input, thank God. But at the same time, it's really hard not to be um excited and frightened at the same time.
Yeah.
And I consider myself a knowledgeable person, but I couldn't imagine, like, the moment that the general populace figures out these things are happening. Like, it's hard not to imagine, like, how people would be scared. Like, I cannot imagine what to say to my kids, like, okay, go into this or that field, because it will make your future safe.
Mm.
Same way my parents thought, becoming a lawyer would be a safe bet, and they pushed me hard to study
Yeah.
law.
Yeah.
And
And recently it was becoming a coder, which looks like maybe that's not the
I
smartest
mean,
thing to be doing
yeah, I mean,
in 15 years from now.
exactly. I mean, I still think that knowing computer science would benefit you as a
Mm,
person, to understand the nuts and bolts of it. But um, I don't necessarily think coding as a career is safe. Mm,
mm.
not in the way it used to be only a couple of years ago. So it's really it's exciting and frightening at the same time.
Yeah, the thing that frightens me is the access and distribution of this technology. Like you have this 10x increase in productivity for people that harness the tools, and most people are kind of not aware of how to use them in their everyday life. And it reminds me a little bit of the internet. A lot of people were very slow to adopt computers either because it was expensive, and okay, maybe that's not the case here because it's quite cheap to get a ChatGPT subscription, but rather because it required a new way of working. I remember when I was a kid, like laptops were available, but they banned them in schools. They said, you need to learn how to do things the old way, which was stupid, right? I should have been learning how to most effectively use the tools in front of me, not how to rote learn, how to, do things in the old school way. And I even see it with education now with my kids. They're saying, or with high schools, they're saying, don't write your essays with ChatGPT because you need to think for yourself. Okay, I agree with that, but they should be rather saying, how do we leverage these tools to best prepare our kids to be kind of most productive? And I think I'm frightened that there will become this divide of more progressive education where people learn to harness these tools and less progressive where people get absolutely left behind by an order of magnitude.
Well, the only thing that would go against this is there are still, unless we figure out how to make robots think, there is still a lot of jobs for people who work with their
In the
hands
physical
in the
realm, yeah.
yeah. But other than this, I'm also frightened. And I think that my biggest regret from my school days is that we didn't get taught the things that mattered. Really, I mean, critical thinking, of course, it matters, but I remember repeating meaningless stuff, about history of, I'm not saying, ancient Egypt doesn't make sense. It does make sense to learn, your history, but I remember distinctively remember that we repeat the cycle every 3 years, because I think the school system, it kind of considers you to forget those things every 3 years. So
Mm.
every 3 years we took a reminder of what happened in the past, like last episode on ancient Egypt, right? Um, Whereas I don't remember that much about coding, and coding was already, a thing back in those days. So I just regret not having learned more about this.
Mm.
And I remember I was trying to teach myself do that, but it wasn't, the knowledge wasn't as available, and we didn't get too much access to internet back in the days. But to your point, I did say the same thing to my mother when I showed her the Google Deep Research thing. I said, like, look, I'm just worried because I still think that there's you know a whole lot of people who didn't get on the internet
Mm.
even after, like, years of this being an accessible thing. Um, and now you expect them to what, get on AI?
Mm.
Like, how the hell would they do that? And this is really frightening. And I don't think you can upskill everybody on, how to
Correct.
use internet
Correct.
and
I
AI.
mean,
Like,
I'm most frightened for people who are in the last 10 years of their careers at the moment.
yeah, but I'm, equally frightened for people who are just entering the fold. Like, what do you tell them? Like, become a junior programmer.
Mm.
Like, how would it make your life easier? The AI is already doing your job, and it's doing it better and cheaper. Like, how can a junior programmer get, their stripes?
Yeah. I mean, that is terrifying. And we'll need to wrap up. So, the last question I want to leave with a kind of message of hope. If you're a founder and you're starting out now, facing this uncertainty, knowing that technology is moving kind of exponentially, knowing that the world is getting smaller, that things are maturing, what would be your advice for them or a few words of wisdom? How would you guide them?
um, Again, I'm sorry for this. I don't have simple answers because it's a complex question. But I'm gonna say that whatever you choose to do, think about firstly what kind of things are true and will stay true in the years to come.
Mm.
And I think, you know the first truth is, you know we are lazy animals. We like our ways of life, and there are things that threaten this way of life: climate change, um, you know, democracy, living in a secure environment, living happily. Those are I think, not only trends but things that are true and will stay true to each one of us.
Mhm.
So whatever you do that helps us achieve this or even more of this would still be valid. So if you choose to build in those fields, then I think your chances of success are higher. Of course, there are always ways to make us, more productive, more efficient, and these things, I think, are here to stay. In the next couple of years. So, if you decide to build something AI driven that makes our life easier, then you also have a chance of success. But I wouldn't, get on the hype train, not knowing why you do this. So, I would really urge you to ask those, difficult questions that matter not only to people in general, but also to you as a person.
Mhm.
I didn't, we didn't touch on climate, but obviously, with me being part of the World Fund team, I care about leaving something behind, in terms of a planet for my kids and their kids. So I am a strong believer in the need to change our ways around, how we produce and consume energy, and how do we save the climate. So for me, this is a topic that I think will is here to stay.
Mm.
And I think the same here goes for different defense-related issues. I think for the first time in our lifetime as Europeans, in the last 30-something years, the democracy is threatened. Like realistically, it's threatened. And if you build in this space, you will also have a higher chance of, um, getting into a helpful ecosystem of people who also think it's important.
Brilliant. Agree with everything you just said. Thank you so much, Pawel, for joining us. You didn't disappoint on delivering with your strong opinions, so thank you for that. How can people follow your work and see what you're on now?
So the next year is going to be quite prolific for us. We have few things to announce and to roll out. So I would strongly encourage you, if you're interested in venture capital, to follow us at www.vcleaders.com. And of course, if you are building in climate, then you can reach out to me. I do reply on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn. Send me a message. I will respond to you if this is something that we can back as a fund. So I'm approachable. Do not hesitate to reach out.
Brilliant. So, Pawel, because we're in the startup kitchen, I'm obliged to ask you, what is the weirdest thing that you've ever eaten?
It has to be a cow tongue soup in Hong Kong. We had a rough night before, to say the least, and I was out there looking for some comfort food, and I went to a local bar, and they had those crazy looking cow tongues hanging from a wall, and they made a soup out of it. It wasn't as bad as it sounds, but definitely one of the craziest things, if not the most crazy thing that I can remember eating.
It sounds gross, and the
It does.
the texture of tongue is completely gross. Thank you.
Thanks.